Hey everybody, welcome back to Backlog Banter. I'm your boy Abram, joined as usual by Mr. Tucker Hazel, and we're here today for the final BLB upload of the Nintendo Switch era, because by the time you're watching this video, there is somewhere between 4 and like probably 1 day remaining until Switch 2 comes out. And we're going to use that opportunity to talk about the Switch 1 and Switch 2 in conversation. What we have here is a nice almost little bridging video where we're going to be going through 10 different topics, and we're going to be deciding things about the universe and the world. We're going to be talking about how many units we think the Switch 2 is going to sell, how many games it's going to release on average, things of that nature, and you'll be able to use the timestamps in the description to jump around to the question you find most germane to your listening experience. But Tucker, I think we ought to get right into it here.
Yeah, you've written down 10 questions and sent them to me. And the two of us are kind of doing this off the cuff. I want this to be a gut check kind of thing.
Yeah.
Switch 2 has, believe it or not, as of now, not happened yet. We have not played it. We don't know what those launch sales numbers... Wait, that's fucking true. We haven't played it for more than 2 hours.
True.
We don't know what those launch sales numbers are like. We haven't had a post-launch direct of any kind. We know very little about it, except for those first few months and a little bit farther in terms of games. But we want to use this as a gut check time capsule, right?
Yeah.
And I wish that I had been doing videos like this in 2017 before Switch launched and been like, all right, how many units is it going to sell? Because even halfway through the Switch's life cycle, we were way off on what we thought it was going to be. We have questions on here like, how long will the generation be? And like, I don't even know what I would have answered 8 years ago with the Switch. I probably wouldn't have said 8 years though, because it's the longest generation for any Nintendo system. So like, there's a lot of stuff here that like we are working on ostensibly no knowledge of what the generation is going to really be like, because a lot is going to change by the time the Switch 2, the next Nintendo system kind of closes out that chapter of gaming history.
Yeah, I certainly agree. And I think, though, at the same time, what will be fun about this video, and the reason I said it's like a bridging thing, is because I mean, really, one of the main things we already know about Switch 2 is that there's great continuity with Switch 1. True. So I think we're going to be able to use our knowledge of not only all of Nintendo's history, but more specifically Nintendo's last 8 years of history, to sort of get our finger on the pulse here a little bit. So Tucker, let's get into it here with question number 1, which is how many units will the Switch 2 sell in its lifetime? I'm going to give you a number. I'm not going to give you a range.
Okay.
I'm going to say, and this is one that I have been thinking about a little bit.
Yeah.
My prediction, 85 million.
85 million. Okay.
Lifetime.
Which would put it around a little around 3DS, a little bit above 3DS.
Yeah, it would.
And at almost, probably by the time it finishes selling, about half of what Switch 1 has sold.
Yeah, and 3DS is a good touchstone here because the numbers are pretty much they're close to exact. The DS sells what, 154 million, I think.
Yeah.
And then 3DS is somewhere in the 70s, if I remember off the top of my head. So you're looking
75.
at a 50% decrease, and I think that a 50% decrease here is fair. And I think when people hear 50% decrease, they're like, "Holy shit, that sounds like a failure." But 85 million would put it as Nintendo's like what, third or fourth best selling piece of hardware ever.
Yeah. The Switch, Wii, and DS, and then there would be this 4.
Yeah. And so
how many units does the NES sell? I don't know that off the top of that. Or Game Boy. I think Game Boy might be.
Game Boy gets tricky because I don't know.
Yeah.
Game Boy is always tricky to calculate because, like, in some ways, technically, GameCube's the longest generation, but it depends on how you want to litigate Game Boy
Statista
Color.
says 118 million.
Yeah. So what I'm saying would probably put Switch around the fifth.
I don't know where they're getting that, but
5th place.
Yeah.
And I think that's reasonable. I think we have to be realistic.
Oh, hold on. Nintendo says 118 million.
Okay, I'll trust them. I'll trust them on
and that's between Game Boy Color.
Sure. So I think with the amount of continuity between Switch 1 and Switch 2 there is, I think there's reason in my view to suggest that a lot of particularly maybe more casual players will feel happy with their Switches. And obviously it's yet to be seen, right? But if there continues to be great cross-generational support, we already know that there is through 2026, but if that
Yeah.
stems, ends up into 2027 as well, and the just market landscape is different, I think 85 million is a fair bet. It's still a big success, but in my view, I don't think Switch 2 will be as successful as Switch 1.
I don't either. And to everything you said, I agree, but
Sure.
I think it's just a different degree of which I agree.
Okay.
And so I'm going to say 102.5 million
Whoa,
units.
that's very specific.
For the Nintendo Switch 2 by the
Yeah.
end of its life cycle. Because I think 2/3 is, in terms of interest, in terms of that casual market slipping away, but I also do think that Nintendo has put themselves in an interesting position where this system is very future-proofed in terms of technology in the way that
Yeah.
Switch 1 was not. And so I think that this system, in terms of being able to support major third-party releases and keep on parity with other technology, and also just being in the position of Nintendo being a stronger force in the industry now,
Sure.
I think all of that, I agree that it'll be smaller. I think the Switch was a revolution where this is an evolution. I think people were more interested in recapturing Nintendo's energy in the last 8 years than they will be in the next 8. But I think that the degree to which it be that the bleeding will be stemmed in comparison to DS to 3DS will, because we're gonna have a bunch of movies coming out that's gonna continue to be promoting Nintendo. We're gonna have major third-party releases, games like FIFA and Madden and Call of Duty that will drive interest in the different kind of casual market that will bring in attention to Nintendo that has never been there or hasn't been there in a long time. And so I agree that it'll be smaller, but I do think that it will still pass 100 million units. I see this as I guess I would say PS4 to PS5, but PS5 is actually outpacing PS4 by a little bit, I think, or it's around the same. But I think that interest will be maintained, maybe stronger than previous iterative Nintendo console changes would lead you to think.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I think a broad question I have, and we'll touch on this more specifically in a later question, though, is just to what extent games like Madden and Call of Duty on Switch will actually move the needle in terms of attracting new customers, i.e. is like a Black Ops 9 Switch bundle something that could be in the cards, right?
Black Ops 9.
The funny thing is Black Ops 9 is going to be here before you know it.
Yeah, it's true. Apparently this year's is Black Ops 7. Maybe it's not called that, but...
But Tucker, let's jump ahead here to question 2, which is how many hardware revisions will the Switch get? Now, I want to clarify this question here because I put a clarification in my answer, so I might as well give you the same. What I'm talking about here is significant revisions to the hardware, not more minute revisions. For example, the Switch that came out in 2019 that had an improved battery, new packaging, but was for all intents and purposes still the base Switch. I'm talking about a Switch Lite, GBA SP type of revision. You go first here.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was already thinking that same thing, so that doesn't really change my thought process too much. I'm going to go ahead and say 3.
Okay.
And I think that...
Bonus points, what are they?
I think it's a handheld-only one, because I think the Lite was a massive success for Nintendo. They see that market. It cements them deeper into the handheld-only market, and that also, as a budget option, I think might be a lot more appealing to people in this era where things are more expensive. If they can get a Switch 2 Lite for $300, it will be the cheapest option on the market. And it'll also still be $100 more than what the Switch Lite cost. I think, right? $200 for Switch Lite? Yeah. I think there will be an OLED. I think the hardcore is already pissed that the Switch 1 doesn't have an OLED, which I think is a little bit ridiculous given that the screen is much higher quality than the Switch screen, even the Switch OLED screen. But I do think Nintendo obviously recognizes OLED is something that people want because they did that with Switch, which we wouldn't really have even expected at the beginning of the last generation. So I think that'll come much sooner, and I think it'll be a Switch 2 OLED. That is a revision. Maybe that is the only real change, is just the screen to give people the option. And then I do think we get a Switch 2 Pro at some point in the system's life cycle. I think we're in the era of hardware-focused Nintendo. And I think that a Switch 2 Pro in 4 or 5 years that again re-ups the amount of third-party support that and parity that can happen with Switch 2 and keeps that system going for even longer.
Yeah.
I think that's the kind of tech-focused Nintendo era that we're in. Is something that is more specifically hardware oriented in terms of power.
Yeah, and I mean, to your defense there, we've got a system like the new 3DS, which was largely about power. I mean, there's about more stable face tracking and integrating the Circle Pad Pro into the system with the C stick. Yeah. But there's precedent for that, and precedent for that on obviously much less powerful systems. Yeah. So I think that's fair. I am going to go 2. Okay. I think that a light is completely a given. I think that that $300 price tag is probably accurate. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to go with a OLED type revision. Okay. Now, I don't think it will be OLED. I had an interesting conversation with my friend John recently, who's much more into tech than I am. Yeah. And what he was talking about is that like OLED is actually maybe not like the future of display technology. There's like QLED and there's just
of course there are. OLED's been around for I don't actually know, but let's just say 8 years at this point. Right. And so like it's gonna be replaced. Yeah, that fucking people thought Laserdisc was the future,
Exactly. I mean, like the Vita had an OLED screen option.
Yeah, sure. Oh, and, yeah. So it's even older than that.
Yeah, and so
10 years maybe.
Excuse me. I think that some kind of nicer premium handheld experience is likely there. I am generally of the view that sort of accounts for the Pro quote unquote slot. Sure. I think a Pro is interesting, and I think we probably have reason to suspect that the Switch Pro at some stage was real, right? Whether it became the OLED, whether it became the Switch 2, I don't know. I think that ultimately where I land on it is that we see that the Switch OLED right now, if I'm correct, still has a pretty thin profit margin of Nintendo's models. And I have to imagine that with the amount of power Nintendo's putting into the machine at the jump, it's going to give them enough, I think, to get through the generation. Sure. And have a revision that provides quality of life features, like maybe a camera right on the unit opposed to a camera that has to be plugged into the top. So what I'm suggesting is, I guess, closer to like a GBASP or a DSi, but DSi has its own library of games. I wouldn't really expect that. Yeah. So yeah, I'm gonna go with 2. I think that the Pro is a coin flip. The other 2 I think are pretty certain. This cheaper budget model than this quality of life thing, like the OLED is. Yeah. I'm gonna go with that.
Yeah. What's interesting is I'm actually starting to think that in an era of tech-focused Nintendo, that much like Game Boy Color or DSi or new Nintendo 3DS, that we might get a mid-gen refresh that does have its own exclusive library. Very possible. Like that would be the first time in a long time that's happened. The new 3DS did have that, but it was barely a factor.
Yeah, it's like 4 or 5 games from Nintendo.
It's actually kind of similar for DSi too. Like
that at least had a storefront and things.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But I'm sticking with what I said. I think when I say OLED, I'm implying a screen refresh.
I agree. I just thought it was interesting for the audience. So people are always like hammering on OLED, but that might not even be the tech.
100%. So that is question 2. You want to move on?
Let's move on to question 3 here. And question 3 is, how many games will Nintendo publish on Switch 2 each year on average? Yeah. Tucker, I think you've done this math for us in the past. The average on Switch 1 was what, like 11 games, I want to say?
Oh, I don't think I have that overall average. I can do it if you want to talk.
I feel like I'll give you my answer. How about? I think that the answer is going to be slightly less than Switch 1. Okay. And I'm going to say 10 games a year on average.
Now, here's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Does this count Nintendo Switch 2 Edition games?
Yeah.
It does. 10 games on average. Okay.
Yeah. because I think that we're going to. That's why I say that, because I think that what we're seeing right now in this first year of, or first 6 months of Switch 2 is that the Switch 1 Editions games are not getting their own month. So what I
Yeah.
mean by that is that DK Bonanza is coming out in July, and then the following week we get Mario Party Jamboree plus Jamboree TV.
Yeah.
I think, though, and maybe this is a little too pessimistic of me, but when those start to dry out, I think that there is a real argument that Nintendo's created a rod for their own backs with the 4K 60 frames a second promise.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Because when we return to thinking about
But
early,
I don't think that's a promise for all games, though. It's something that the hardware is capable of, but I don't necessarily even think that every game that Nintendo publishes will hit that.
yeah, I just think that my view is that with the way they're speaking about the system, I think that that's or I'll put it this way, I think the expectation they're setting is that you're going to reach these kinds of
Sure,
resolutions and frame rates. And that's intensive, particularly on the resolution side. I mean, the density of a 4K texture is many magnitudes larger than the density of a 1080p texture.
Yeah. Sure.
And so I could see us in a position where maybe by end of year 2 of the system, coming into year 3 of the system, when we've really hit the Switch 2 or the Switch 2 editions of Switch 1 games that make the most sense, we find ourselves going just a little bit slower, getting games out. And to be clear, 10 games a year on average is still nearly a game a month. So I'm not expecting a massive decrease in output compared to Switch 1, where a game a month was the cadence oftentimes. But I think it'll be a little bit less. Did I vamp long enough for you to get an answer on the average?
No, because I have all the games written down, but I don't want to have to count.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a fucking impossible task. There's like 70 or 80 Nintendo published games on Switch 1.
Well, I mean, look, I can you know what? Average just means I can just divide.
Yeah, do you have the total?
I can divide the amount of games by
8
years. By 8, yeah. The total number of Nintendo games published on Switch is 132 as of now.
Okay.
Now, the other interesting thing is, how do we count that in terms of, which gets us to 16.5. So that would be a drastic decrease down to 10.
Yeah.
How do we count cross-gen games in cross-gen in the way of, like, we're not confident about it, but like if Rhythm Heaven and Tomodachi Life also get Switch 2 versions, or like if Woolly World comes to technically both and has like higher resolution on Switch 2.
I guess that is that does complicate it. I'm just saying all in.
Sure, and that can be your answer. But
yeah.
I do think that with that complication, and another thing is, I agree that they're going to run out of Switch 2 edition stuff. But one thing that we've seen that has helped them really keep up output in the last few years of the Switch is partnerships. Partnerships out the ass. Yeah. Partnerships with people we've never heard of before, teams we've never heard of before. And I think that it seems like almost all of those were successful for Nintendo. And I think it'd be interesting if they stopped having those partnerships to be able to support their library and keep it more vast. I think that also combined with the fact that they're partway through the Switch 2 generation, Nintendo is going to have an entire other building's worth of internal developers to work with that I think will speed up or balance out the development time for something like a 4K development if you just have more bodies working on it or making more games. I think it's possible that we get extra EPD internal development teams because they have another building's worth of people able to work on projects. And we've also seen teams like NST start to be their own development houses that really starts to pick up the amount of games that Nintendo can work on. And this is not and then a partnership like Studio 2 and Studio S, Bandai Namco has been working with Nintendo, but they are setting up their own specific team. Yeah. And Nintendo has acquired Shiver. We don't know what they're going to do. There's the Pokemon Works, which is this Game Freak and Ilka collaboration team that is now doing Pokemon Champions that will presumably do 1 or 2 games across the course generation. They're publishing a fucking FromSoft game. Like, they might publish these fucking games from, I don't know, plenty of other teams as well. So I'm going to say I agree that it will be decreased if we're going with 16 for the average. but I think it's still going to be on average more than one a month. And so I'm going to
Okay.
say 14 games. a year.
14. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my number might be a little too pessimistic. I'm just another thing I just am curious about is what the average scope of a Switch 2 game is going to
Yeah.
be.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting.
Because obviously, you know, we're going to see Nintendo putting their best foot forward at the start of the generation, just as it did in 2017. But you're looking at two very, very ambitious games, right? And
Yeah.
and long in development games, and for sure Mario Kart World, and I would say presumably Donkey Kong Bonanza as well.
Yeah.
Um,
But then I think, interestingly enough, simultaneously, Dragon Drive and Welcome Tour,
yeah,
and
that's true.
Kirby, and of course all the other the Switch 2 edition stuff, like these are also much smaller scale projects, and so it'll be interesting to see how that
Yeah.
balances out as we get a sense of the actual release cadence and identity of Nintendo games on Switch 2.
Yeah, that's fair. Whether or not you'll take this in the official, you know, record or not, I want to change my prediction to 11.
It's fair,
I want to go slightly up. I still think slightly less than one a month on average.
Yeah.
It's still a meaningful difference between your 14 and my 11.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Let's go to number 4 here, and I think this is going to be a real barn burner. And this is an electric question from me, not to pat myself on the back.
Everyone fireproof your goddamn barns, you know what I'm saying?
How many new IP will Nintendo launch on the system?
Yeah.
Now, let me qualify this here, because I was thinking through my own question in my head. New IP on Switch, let's start to give some examples here. Snipper Clips is a new IP. Labo is a new IP. Ring Fit is a new IP. The Stretchers is a new IP.
Yeah.
I think I'm thinking big and small new IP.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Because obviously, in terms of big new IP, I think you could make the case on Switch for like 3, like Labo.
Yeah, maybe 3.
Labo, Arms, Ring Fit.
Probably. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Do you need a second to think? I'll give my.
I'm actually just going to count on Switch 1.
Sure.
You can keep talking.
Well, because let me ask you a clarifying question here. Would you count Game Builder Garage as a new IP?
Yeah.
See, I wouldn't, because.
But it literally is. Like, it's a different intellectual property. It's not named after something that's previously existing, even if the technology is based off of something else.
Tingle's Rosy Rupee Land isn't called Legend of Zelda.
Yeah, but he's a pre-existing character.
Yeah, but everything but like those little guys are in Labo's mode. Labo's garage mode. Yeah.
Like specifically like same models and everything?
I believe so. I mean,
okay, I mean that might be true. But that also is one. That's one game that is.
Yeah, this is more just my curiosity. This little guy, he is from Gigazine, showing off the VR kit, VR Garage, and it has the guy from Garage. That's really just for my own curiosity.
Sure.
Tucker, I'm going to say 8.
Okay. There are, of course, some other questions in terms of publishing collaborations. Something like on Switch 1, games like Octopath and Triangle Strategy are new IP that were published initially by Nintendo. But those are Square Enix games. They complicate things just a little bit.
I wouldn't. For example, I wouldn't count Duskbloods because we know that FromSoft owns that IP. Square Enix owns the Octopath IP.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's fair. That's a good comparison.
Yeah. So I'm gonna say 8.
Okay. By my math here, it looks like there's about a dozen. Yeah. And those are almost entirely small things.
Yeah.
And as we mentioned, like there are really only a couple of any consequence, and consequences. We're using the word consequence very, very loosely there.
1-2 switch of great consequence.
Yeah. But so you say 8?
Yes.
It's interesting. I'm leaning into Copium here.
Okay.
And the Copium is, of course, I love Nintendo's IP, and I like when they try new things, even if they aren't particularly successful. I think that there's a chance that now that Switch 1, through Switch 1, they've reestablished most of their IP and brought them up to some level of, or closer parity of marketing push and multimedia presence. We've worked up to that. I think we still have those second tier IP to bolster fully up to that with things like movies or shows or something.
Yeah.
Or theme parks. But I do think that by the end of the Switch 2 generation, the well is going to be mined in terms of what things they can realistically bring back in a major way.
Sure.
The interesting thing is, we're already at 3 new IP for the Switch 2 generation.
Dragon Drive, Welcome Tour, and what am I forgetting as the third one?
I would say, well, this isn't if this actually happens, but the tech test game, the tech demo game,
I already released on Switch One.
Yeah, I know it did, but presumably that would be a cross-gen game at least.
Yeah,
if not, I've been thinking maybe Switch 2 exclusive, even though it wasn't initially. I don't know how I'm feeling about that, but so that's 3 out of your potential 8 that would be in the first year, and so yeah. I think that to wrap up my point, I do think Nintendo, in their multimedia focused era, it would behoove them to start something fresh that can be introduced directly into that multimedia cross promotional Nintendo era. So, and with especially that expanded EPD internal structure by the end of the generation, I do think that we're going to get copium. We're going to get a couple major new Nintendo IP.
So as a side bet here, I'm still waiting for your overall number, but when you say major, you're thinking like of an ARMS or a Splatoon caliber.
Sure. Yeah.
Do you think there'll be several of those?
I think it'll be 2. I think it'll be 2.
I would have also said 2. I think 2 is a safe number for major new IP experiments.
Yeah. And we would say that Switch also had that with Ring Fit and ARMS.
Yeah,
so 2, okay.
Yeah, I would maybe say 3. I would actually maybe, because Labo got 4
games
iterations.
Yeah,
technically 5, because I just made the case that Game Builder Garage is part of it.
Yeah, and we'll see if 1-2 Switch continues into the next generation.
Yes.
Yeah, you know what? No, I'll go 3. And I'll say my overall number will be 16.
16. Wow, that's double. I think I would go higher with my number if Nintendo had shown an interest in the last 8 years to do more with the eShop.
Sure. Yeah, fair enough.
Because if you think about 3DS, 3DS racked up a shit ton of new IP because they were experimenting with games at the smallest end. Yeah. But I think that's fair. I think that's a good I think it's a little high, but I think it's a cool. I think that's. I gotta
swing for the fence.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Next question. Now here's where we're gonna get out of numbers and into statements of other iterations and permutations.
Okay, all right.
Will the generation be shorter, longer, or about the same length as Switch 1? And I'm for the about the same length. I'm willing to say a year plus or minus.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's interesting because the biggest factor leading into this is if the sales potential of a markedly more expensive piece of hardware drives a markedly different amount of sales. I think that if we see a PS3 or 3DS style weird launch where people are really turned off after that first month and a half from buying the system because of its increased prices, then we might be looking at a shift in direction from Nintendo partway through, or 2 years into the generation. That might mean that they want to move on to something newer quicker. If it doesn't carry the momentum. But I think that is, I think the sticker shock problem that I'm kind of, I'll call what I was just referencing, is a problem for now and not for 6 months from now when people are used to all this shit. And so I don't think that the sticker shock issue will actually be something that would cause Nintendo to make a shift and then want to get move through it quicker. I think that if they are quick with budget options in terms of different games that are a little bit cheaper, in terms of hardware options that are a little bit cheaper, and I also think I have to stick with my previous guns of this video, that they're going to be doing a power refresh partway
Yeah.
through. And so I'm going to say it's longer. I think that they will be able to turn this, what is for right now a much more powerful piece of hardware, much more expensive piece of hardware at launch that people are maybe a little bit iffy on, if the masses will be interested in it, into the budget version going into the future. That is the way that people can really get into a gaming ecosystem on the cheap in comparison to their competitors. And I think that the success of Nintendo in last generation and this generation will push third-party developers to bring their parity to Nintendo's levels.
Yeah.
And so I think it can last for even longer. And the interesting thing is, gaming has trended over time towards extending things longer. Live service games are lasting longer. Game development is taking longer.
Yeah.
Game systems, on average, their life cycles are getting longer. And so I think that there's not really any reason to think that would stop. And so I'm going to... But here's the other thing is, when you say you give or take a year is the make or break for short or longer the same.
Yeah,
I think you got to be specific
Sure.
in terms of the amount of years. And so I'll say 9 years.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about the sticker shock I don't agree with, because console launch demand is pretty inelastic. I mean, famous examples recently are systems like the Wii U and specifically the Wii U selling out. And having a really good 2 months, 3 months, and then falling off of a fucking cliff. Same as 3DS. So I think
exactly.
I think that whether or not the price is an issue is probably not a question until September.
Well, that's what I was saying. Yeah, for 6 months thing. Yeah, I think we're on the exact same page.
Oh, okay, I might have just misunderstood. But I think there's a couple factors to consider here. One is that if in part Nintendo is interested in having deeper relationships with these third parties.
Yeah.
One thing we've heard from Mark Cerny and people in PlayStation is third parties came to them and said or PlayStation's hardware architects go to third parties and say, okay, what do you want? The answer is more power. Mm-hmm. Even if Nintendo is able to be an anchor on that for, in both of our opinion, the better. In some meaningful way, how long does that last, right? Do you get to a position where obviously PlayStation's not going anywhere, high-powered PC gaming's not going anywhere, is in fact a position where in 5 or 6 years, the more average lifespan of a Nintendo system, you get big partners who are now delivering games on the console, like Activision, like EA, turning to Nintendo and saying, hey, look, if you want us to keep honoring these agreements we have, and delivering meaningful versions of our games, you need to release something that is more powerful.
Yeah, like a Switch to Pro.
Potentially, but if you're thinking about... Nintendo is likely in a position that they've been in many times before, where they are going to have, maybe a year to 18 months in the market before the PS6 and other piece of hardware is likely out.
Yeah.
And suddenly the gulf is going to be quite massive again. It makes
quite massive, yes, but also less massive. Because we get diminishing returns on new hardware every single time.
100%.
In terms of power jumps, I mean.
Yeah, but I just don't think is a marginal power increase that important? Or sorry, that's the wrong word. Is a marginal increase actually going to close that gap to a meaningful degree? I don't know, but this also relies on a theory that Nintendo's more interested in what the third-party partners have to say. My honest appraisal, and we'll get into this with a later question, I think that there's the third-party support on Switch 2 conversation gives me a lot of shades of Wii U or Switch, wherein I think that there is a good chance that in 3 years from now we're on the lower end of support. Sure. So if we're just looking at what service is Nintendo, I'm gonna go with the answer of about the same length.
Okay, so I'll go longer and you'll go say.
Yeah, so that's about 8 years. That would be longer than most Nintendo systems. We were marking this in our video with Bo. looking right now, reflecting back 8 years into the past, gets you thinking about Switch launch games. If you did that same exercise in 2017, you're looking at mid-generation Wii games. Like the length of the Switch generation, particularly by Nintendo standards, with like Game Boy as the only exception, was
Well,
huge.
that difference was mostly because of Wii U was shot in the fucking leg halfway out the womb.
Yeah, but even still, you've got GameCube in 2001, and you're getting Wii in
Yeah.
2006, then you're getting Wii U 6 years after
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
6 years is often a sweet spot for Nintendo.
Wii U was 2012. That's
yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then even though the Wii U did so poorly, you're still looking at 5 years to get to the Switch.
Sure.
But I broadly think that this is something that tracks with the overall movement of the console space as a whole.
Yeah.
Whereas, for instance, now if the PS6 comes out next year or the year after, you're looking at basically the same length of time as PS4 to PS5. Like a 7-year window.
Correct.
7
window. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm going to go about the same. I think about 8 years, again, makes sense.
Yeah, sure.
Let's lap here. My time.
Now, but by the way, just a clarification for what we were saying. That is until the launch of the next system and not necessarily the entire life cycle of Switch 2. Because Switch 1 is still going and might still be going for another 18 months to 2 years, frankly.
Yeah.
PS4 is technically still going.
Yeah, it could hit that fabled 10-year, Switch 1 will be relevant for 10-year window thing.
Yeah.
But
I think it probably will.
yeah, I think that's fair. But obviously, that's not quite what we're talking about. But let's do question 6 here. And this is a personal question here. Let's get introspective for a second. Will you, Tucker Hazel, or me, Abram Buhner, play the system more, less, or about the same amount as Switch 1?
Absolutely less. There's no fucking shot I play it more. Not only because I'm going to be older, I'm going to have a job, which as of the entire Switch 1 generation, didn't have a full-time job before. Still don't. I will have much more responsibility, and I will have less time to play games, and as my gaming tastes have shifted over the course of the last 8 years, they've been much more fractaled across many platforms. I often find myself reflecting on how long it's been since I've used each platform, but that happens to each one because I cycle between them. I get really excited about Xbox games, and I play that, and I explore Game Pass for a month or whatever. I'm like, God damn, I haven't touched my PS5 in a while, Jesus. And so I'm like, oh man, there's so many cool games on PS Plus, and then I'll like go back to my Switch library, or I'll buy a bunch of things on a Steam sale, and I go through these cycles to where I feel very balanced in the amount of use that I give every system, but Nintendo is always, that's my fucking ride or die right there.
Right.
And it really depends on if I end up starting to get my third-party games, especially if they're at launch on my Switch 2. My gut goes with no. It would be interesting to see if Switch 2 breaks this, but I have a very strong internal association with third-party games and non-Nintendo platforms because that's been the way it's been for forever. And so when I think about where do I want to play a FromSoft game, even if they're on Switch, I've played all of them on PlayStation, and so I'll probably want to play it on PlayStation. Insert any of my favorite third-party developers there. That's still probably true. And also, then it comes to availability. If it's on something like PS Plus or Xbox Game Pass, that's where I'm going to play it. And Nintendo doesn't, at the moment, if they might by the end of the generation, doesn't have an answer to those services in terms of bringing meaningful new content to for us as a subscription. So all signs. I just want to point out, Switch was basically all I played from 2017 to 2022. Frankly, I mean, I liked my PS5 quite a bit as I got a couple years into it, but you and I had a lot of conversations those first few years of PS5. Like, there's fucking nothing to play, and I also just didn't really have a lot of PS4 games, and I didn't own an Xbox until 2021, and so literally every sign points to there is no shot that I'm playing Switch 2 more than I played Switch 1. Where I am in my life, where I am in my taste as a gamer, the only asterisk being if meaningful third-party support does happen, and I'm interested in what wider breadth of the industry, maybe Switch 2 becomes my home for these things. And so it'll be fascinating to play out, but I think I very much lean towards less.
Sure, and for me, the the same two inputs, game taste and time to play, leads me to the inverse output. I think I'm gonna play it more.
Yeah.
I think for me, I've over the last couple years, I have found myself really not preferring to play on anything other than Switch.
Yeah.
It, I just find myself a little bit less moved by those other ecosystems. I have access to every platform.
Yes.
I have a Series S behind this monitor, and I have a Series X in my bedroom, and I have my PS5 in there too. I've actually bought two PS5s as well.
Yeah.
And I have my Steam Deck. It's it's always hiding around some corner.
Yeah.
And I have a Playdate as well.
You do have a Playdate, yeah.
I do.
That's got a solid combined total of 6 hours of playtime.
That's not fair. It's probably like 4. I just think that I would like to get to a place personally where I only play on Switch too.
Yeah.
I just think it would be interesting, and I actually think for the way I play, it would let me get deeper into a lot of things. I find myself, when there's too much choice, I don't end up engaging as much. Something about the limitations of having one platform that I can really sink my teeth into is exciting to me. And it doesn't mean I'm not going to buy a PS6 Plus or Xbox Series Z, but I think realistically, I think I'll probably choose one. But if we're in a position where most of the third-party stuff comes over, maybe I'd choose neither. But yeah, I think the answer is more.
Abram, you're gonna be able to play all those fucking Xbox games on your Switch too.
Yeah. So and the Switch also just fits quite nicely into my lifestyle. I like to be able to play in little fits and spurts wherever I am. I don't do so many like big multi-hour sessions anymore. I rack up a lot of time, but I rack it up in I think a different way than a lot of people do.
Yeah.
So I'll go more there. But let's get back to some.
Well, now here's the question. I just would. How do you think we would really measure that? I guess it would just feeling. Be. Yeah, it's checking back in 8 years and being like, look, looking back, what was my time divided between these platforms? Because the interesting thing is, I think the reason why I played so much Switch is because there is a key handful of a little bit under a dozen games that I got super, super, super into. Sure. It was well over 100 hours in Smash and in Breath of the Wild and Xenoblade, and in Xenoblade and Animal Crossing and these and all the Pokemon games. And I think honestly, Tears of the Kingdom might have been the last game I put like even anywhere close to 100 hours into. Yeah. Because I don't find myself getting as deep into games as I used to. Sure. Like if there's another open era Zelda, I'm probably not going to go for every Korok or whatever it is. Which I did with Breath of the Wild. When there's next Animal Crossing, it's certainly not going to be at a point in time when I'm going to be playing more Animal Crossing than I was in 2020. Yeah. And I'm not going to, or with like Smash. I'm not in college anymore. I'm not in high school when I was playing Smash Ultimate. So I'm going to buy the next Smash. I'm sure I'm going to love it. But, and so on that sort of title by title basis, how do you, this is kind of a different question. Sure. Your answer could be more, but do you think that you'll be playing these comparative titles to a deeper level on Switch 2 than you did on Switch 1?
Yeah, probably. I think, because I've been asking myself this, and this would actually be an interesting discussion to have as a totally different video. Yeah. But as I've been realizing, like I'll give you this example, right? This year, I would say that there's been actually nothing of consequence released on Switch. Sure. Like actually nothing of consequence.
I haven't played anything on Switch.
First party or third party. I mean, just across.
I booted up my Switch a couple days ago. I don't even remember why. Yeah. And I saw that I still had my Brothership cartridge in there, which is a game I bought on launch day, put it on launch day, and never launched. Yeah. Which just goes to show, like, yeesh. and
zoinks. And the thing is, I don't think I've played any games on my PS5. I guess I played, like, the Star Wars Outlaws DLC. Yeah. I've put less than 10 hours of game time into my PS5 this year. And on Xbox, I played a lot of Monster Hunter. Like 40 hours of Monster Hunter. yeah, I'm always playing a little bit of Halo. Hopefully then I can do that on Switch too. Hopefully I can do
Yeah.
both on Switch too, actually. Um,
Yeah.
excuse me. And I played Ninja Gaiden Black too, which
Black,
hopefully I'll
yeah.
be able to do that on Switch too when Ninja
Yeah.
Gaiden 4 comes out. The point is, in this year with nothing on Switch, it's still my most played platform by a wide margin.
Yeah.
I think that
Because you're a live service gamer.
I'm a live service gamer playing all the hottest live service games like F-Zero 99, which I just passed 75 hours.
No, but the interesting thing, I use that as a joke, but it is actually kind of true. Your most played games are older games.
Yes.
It is revisiting Mario Kart, F-Zero, Kirby, Halo,
Pikmin
these games
2.
that are, but like we hear a lot about the industry trending towards people playing games that are older on like a hours basis, a lot more than they play new games. And that's even true for someone like you.
Yes.
You just don't play the other games that people are playing a lot of that they more actively track and that are monetizable. You have probably just as many hours in Kirby Dream Buffet as someone has in their fucking 2K.
Yeah, I'm big on the non-monetizable, non-visible service games.
Yes.
But
you want to be off the grid, which by the way is a game. A live service one. Not long for this world.
the wind up to the swing was going to be for me if I didn't play insert 3 high profile PS6 games that I really want to play.
Yeah.
Would my life be that much different?
Yeah.
I would probably have an opportunity at some point in the 7 to 10 years that the PS6 is on the market to be visiting you and play the game on your PS6.
Sure. Yeah, sit down and play an Intergalactic for fucking 20 hours while I just sit there and twiddle my thumbs. This is in 2029, by the way.
Exactly. Am I just as happy with the just Nintendo library? Yeah. The answer is maybe.
I would be mad because our presumably limited hangout time would be you sitting on the couch playing a single player game.
Well, PlayStation's gonna have to start making the game shorter anyway, right? So, if only for this reason.
Yeah.
This is all to say, I think that if I end up with just one of the two systems next generation, and Switch 2 as it is answering a lot of issues I have with the form factor of Switch 1 and things, and they've managed to find a way to make it bigger but not less comfortable. It's the same thickness still. I just think I'm gonna really, really love the system. And I don't really see a world where the offerings of these big series are more scant than what Switch had.
No, yeah.
So
even if it's not maybe as much as it would be ideal, you're right.
Yeah.
The accessibility will be there.
So we'll see where it goes.
One thing I'm very curious to see,
Yeah.
and maybe this is just like a question fucking 11B or whatever, is if you actually end up liking the form factor of Switch 2.
Yeah.
Because you make pretty big bones about even Switch being something that's slightly too big for your preferences.
Yeah.
And Switch 2 is bigger.
And
so
bigger.
If you're annoyed by Switch, it's not really that different. It's actually worse for your taste.
This is true, but also part of my worry before we saw the system and then actually had to hold the system was that like the Steam Deck, it was going to be this like thicker,
sure,
and like ergonomically different type of thing. Mm-hmm. It's really not. I mean, they've demonstrated it, and we've held it. It is literally exactly the same thickness. They just spread all the shit inside it out over a wider surface area, which to me is the best solution, I think. But we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, well, that's another.
Yeah, I'm just
bet
curious
here.
about that.
It's another side bet.
Yeah, actually, I want to type that down. Will Abram like the form factor of Switch 2?
Can you change this? Change it to will he like it in December of 2025? And we can check it on this question specific. Because I want to have it for a little bit. See what I'm saying? Like,
yeah. No, I'm just talking about the end of the generation.
Oh, fair
right?
enough. Yeah, fair enough.
Because, by the way, I'm locking this Google Doc in a fucking crate under the ground.
Sure.
For 9 years, because that's how long the generation's gonna last. If you recall, you think that you will.
Yeah.
I think that you won't because you don't like big things.
It's fair enough.
Okay, question number 7. Will Nintendo reinvent more, less, or roughly the same number of franchises.
Now, this is an ephemeral question. Let me give you a little bit of the thought process behind it.
Yeah.
What this question is asking us to interrogate is specifically whether or not the big Nintendo franchises are going to change the same degree that they changed on Switch 1. So, your 3D Marios, your 3D Zeldas, your Animal Crossings, your Kirby's, these franchises that I'm specifically interested in, these franchises that just went through a big change. Will they go?
And so will they be reinvented again?
Yeah. So an example is that people are often saying that the next 3D Mario game will be an open world game. I would count that as a major reinvention of 3D Mario.
Sure. Yeah.
So do you what the subtext of the question is this a generation like PS5 wherein the sequels to are iterative or not? That's basically this question.
Sequels in the Nintendo way, though. Sequels in the
the next 3D Mario, the next Animal Crossing, etc.
Yeah.
I'll give you my answer. What you're thinking?
Oh.
I think the answer is obviously less, in my view.
Less, okay,
yeah.
Sure.
I was talking with my friend Tony about this at lunch today. Actually, we were talking about the next Animal Crossing game.
Yeah.
In my view, there's no chance EPD5 is throwing out what they did with New Horizons.
No.
There's no chance.
Yeah.
In my view, the answer for what the next Animal Crossing game is a game where you basically have like a Minecraft server, kind of, where you can actually collaboratively build a town. Not your friend comes through your gate and then the game says, sorry, you can't change your carpet because there's somebody visiting.
Yeah.
Basically, like the core of OG Animal Crossing was there were 4 houses and you and 4 friends could play and share data. And obviously play asynchronously. I would say that that's not a massive change. I think that you're looking at a lot of evolutionary.
I would disagree, actually. I think that a Animal Crossing game that is sold on the concept of you having a much more active building world with your friends, like it's sold around that multiplayer as like the primary thing that is new about the game, is a complete reinvention. I mean, it might not objectively be because there was the option if you lived locally with people on the fucking GameCube to do that, but that's not how most people play Animal Crossing. And that's not the understanding of what Animal Crossing is. And so if the game is designed around a server-based, maybe even more people active building of a town, that's a markedly different video game experience than you visiting your own island or town. And I would consider that even bigger change than what New Horizons did versus New Leaf.
I'm just thinking in terms of New Horizons fundamentally changed what the core gameplay loop of Animal Crossing is, with the crafting and with all that stuff. What I'm suggesting is that a change, and I don't want to get bogged down in the weeds of this hypothetical version of Animal Crossing might not even be true. That's, in my view, you're just playing Animal Crossing basically in the same way, but you both can collaborate on terraforming to change where you're going to divert the river to or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, like, look at something like 3D Zelda. Is the next 3D Zelda going to be fundamentally different than Tears of the Kingdom? This is kind of the crux of the question. I think that the answer is probably no. I think that there will be less reinvention because I think that there's more continuity here. And I don't see why you would throw out, like, why would you... Like, people are always saying Mario Wonder Switch 2 edition. Mario Wonder 2 is the hotter proposition because we know that they have a myriad of level design concepts finished they didn't implement.
Yeah.
Or the next 3D Kirby, I think, is going to be to Forgotten Land as Robobot was to Triple Deluxe. And I think as you start to stack those up, you're in a position where the top, probably S, A, B tiers of Nintendo series are iterating in the tradition of what they just did on Switch. And then you have things like Donkey Kong Bonanza in and amongst. But for me, I think the answer is less.
Yeah. What would be really interesting to do is really... explore, and this is not for this video, but explore which franchises we do think got a major reinvention on Switch.
Sure.
Like, actually, and where that sort of line is. I'm gonna go with the same.
Okay.
And I'm gonna go with the same because I think that there is space. Now, yes, I agree. There will be some of them that continue forward the groundwork that was set up by Switch One's reinventions. I agree with that. But I do think that even within those ones that weren't reinvented with Switch and saw great success to that, there are some that will then be reinvented again from those learnings. I don't know if we're going to get a Smash Ultimate that's just the same thing but bigger. If that is something that changes the way that the movesets work, or the general fucking physics or something, I don't really know. But like, if it's a different kind of Smash game and not a just building bigger, I would consider that within Smash's scope a reinvention. Like I said with Animal Crossing, I see that hypothetical next game as that next step. That it's the Mario, another reinvention. Zelda's an interesting one because Zelda does always reinvent itself usually. Like if you go from Majora's Mask to Wind Waker, that's basically a reinvention. Obviously there's the same similar structure, but in terms of world design and feel and identity, they're very, very different. 3D Mario, as I said, that has the space to reinvent. Pokemon is interesting because Pokemon actually has been doing so much reinvention that like it's probably just going to continue that reinvention.
Yeah, that's how I feel.
Kirby, I think, will be the same.
Pikmin, I think, will be the same. Another
Pikmin, yeah. Good. Pikmin 4 was that reinvention, I guess, even though it's a much more limited reinvention. Mario Kart, we're getting the reinvention for Mario Kart. We're getting the reinvention for Donkey Kong.
Yeah.
And the reason that... So it's a mixed bag on series that were reinvented on Switch if they're going to be reinvented again. I think some will say the same and some will be reinvented again. But I also do think that there's still a deeper well that they can go to for those reinventions.
Sure.
Mario Kart and Donkey Kong being great examples. I think a series like Splatoon at some point in the next generation will get something that feels like a substantial... That was the old era of Splatoon, and here's the new era of Splatoon.
I hope so. I think
F-Zero is ready for that. I think Star Fox is ready for that. I think Metroid maybe is ready for that. Like, I do think there's this next layer of IP that will get there. Kirby and Forgotten Land, Pokemon Legends Arceus, Mario Odyssey moments.
Or even a Mario Tennis Aces. Like, you can kind of go up and down the catalog and see how they change stuff. I mean, Splatoon's an interesting one because in the Mario Kart Acid Developer interview, there was this interesting passage. I forget who said it from the team, but said the game is not called Mario Kart 9 because they're taking it in a different direction. If it had just been more tracks and things, it would have been Mario Kart 9.
Yes.
I would love if the next Splatoon game is in that position. That's just something I was actually thinking about today because I was playing some Splatoon 3 earlier. And it's like, I think that there's some common sense. That's maybe not fair. There's some logical things you could change for Splatoon 4, but I would really like if it was Splatoon. I don't know. I don't want to sound like a fucking DeviantArt cover maker. So Splatoon insert some kind of proper noun or verb or something instead of 4.
Sure.
But no, I think that's fair. So you're going to go about the same. I'm going to go
same,
less.
Yep.
To be clear, I don't actually take an issue with less. Putting that
sure. I actually do agree with that.
Yeah.
We're stipulating different kinds of reinvention, which is where our answers differ.
Yeah.
But less is what makes more sense in a certain way because Nintendo saw success with this, and usually it comes in waves, but after a success, you continue doing that until it no longer works. And so with a lot of these reinventions, they now have a very solid framework where a second iteration of each of these things can happen. And that doesn't mean the games are going to be any less great, but they will probably be less inventive.
Yeah, like I think...
Reinventive.
Because I look at a game like New Horizons, which I have a lot of issues with, but I have issues with it because I feel like they didn't take those ideas all the way yet. And I think that there's these teams that tried things that weren't quite there, in my view. Bowser's Fury, another great example. So, take another... Pokemon, a biggest example, right? So you got to take another whack at all that stuff, I think. So I wouldn't even want them to throw out all of the ideas for a lot of these series. But let's interrogate the next question here, Tucker. That was a weird way for me to put it. Let me get a prop for this one. How about this prop? Speaking of Splatoon, just talking about it. Here's my small fry amiibo.
Oh, hello,
I think one of the greatest amiibo ever. Very funny, very beautiful sculpt. This is a yes/no question. Will the last amiibo release during the Switch 2 generation?
Abram, this is a question for the end of the Switch 3.
You think it's gonna be around still?
Well, no, but even if it So let's just say it's fucking 2032 and it's the end of the Switch 2. And Amiibo stopped releasing 2 years ago. And then at the launch of Switch 3, we get another Amiibo. A year into Switch 3, we get another Amiibo. Then no, the Amiibo didn't stop being made during Switch 2.
No, but I don't think you're misunderstanding the question. Do you think that the last Amiibo is we're gonna say 8 or 9 years? In the next 8 or 9 years, will the last Amiibo be released? Because if there's an Amiibo with the launch of Switch 3, then the answer is no.
No, I agree, but we literally have to wait until partially through the Switch 3 to actually find out if that's true.
Oh, sure. Yes. But do you?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. It's a question for Switch 3.
Yeah, but also
it's about Switch 2, but it's for Switch 3.
But if the last, if we get an Amiibo in 2027, then in 2028 there's no Amiibo. 2029 there's no Amiibo unless there's a real slider, right? A real curveball.
Yeah.
The answer is yes. What are your thoughts here? I think the answer is yes.
I think that. Okay, you say yes. Yes. I think there's no reason to really stop.
Sure.
I mean, they've found a really good balance between some too many Amiibo and no Amiibo. They found a good balance, which is some Amiibo. They do very targeted ones for targeted releases with higher quality builds for more expensive. It's interesting that at the launch of Switch 2, there are more Amiibo launching with Switch 2 than have released on one day in maybe the entire Switch generation. Maybe outside of a couple drops of Smash ones that might have been a little bit bigger, but they were also very specific about when they released Smash Amiibo. That
Tears
was
of the Kingdom had several. That's probably the most recent.
It did have, yeah.
Was that just 3?
No.
That was Link, Ganondorf, and Zelda.
Yeah.
And we're getting a shit ton more. Yeah, what is the last big Amiibo day?
Because there's 7 releasing on Switch 2 launch day.
3? How many came out for the launch of Splatoon?
Probably 3. Because they do those in waves.
Yeah, because that was Small Fry and then 2 others. It was a 3-pack.
Inklings, yeah. But my point is, they actually kind of are doubling down on Amiibo right now than they have been during the Switch generation. It's more than likely just a bump that comes with a new system. But I especially think that them reaching into multiple Street Fighter Amiibo is fascinating. And to me, portends a collaboration of Amiibo as a format more heavily with third party going into the future. I wouldn't be surprised if we get an Elden Ring Amiibo, like a pot friend Amiibo.
Yeah, I mean, we got the Praise the Sun guy Amiibo.
Yeah, the Solaire, there was very scant examples of those third party Amiibo collaborations across, of course, Switch 2, but 3 from one series on one day, I think is very interesting. And so I'm going to say that Amiibo becomes slightly more prevalent, not very prevalent, but slightly more prevalent in Switch 2, and are still around because it's just a smart business proposition to make fucking figures of your shit.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I say no is that the third party, the Street Fighter Amiibo...
Well, no, you say yes. It will be the last.
Sorry, yes. Yeah, I think the last one. The third party Amiibo are interesting, but... We got like the Loot Goblin. There's a bunch of Shovel Knight Amiibo. Capcom has done Amiibo before with the Mega Man stuff. The only new Amiibo
and Monster Hunter.
And Monster Hunter. Actually, a shit ton of Monster Hunter Amiibo.
Yeah.
So there's actually some good continuity on Capcom's side to do it again because it's their next major Switch release since Rise, I guess. But the only thing Nintendo is adding is Zelda Amiibo. Now, it's a lot of Zelda Amiibo, yes, but it's only Zelda Amiibo, and that's a pre-existing series that they're sort of rounding out. Yeah. I think Donkey Kong Bonanza joins the club of Pikmin 4, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, Mario Wonder, etc. of games that, if they had released a decade ago, would have had several Amiibo and have none.
Sure, definitely.
So I think...
the Odd Rock Amiibo.
Yeah, I mean, I just think... But for real, like if that game came out in 2016, there would be 4 or 5 Amiibo with that game, right?
Yeah, all the fucking bosses that we don't know the names of yet.
Yeah, so I just think that we're already we're on the right foot because there are a lot of Amiibo coming up, but the wrong foot because there's already games again, like there have been for the last probably 4 years where there should be Amiibo and they're not. So.
Yeah, I mean. Well, I mean, you say that, but also, like, ARMS didn't get Amiibo. and Xenoblade 2 didn't get Amiibo. Xenoblade 3 did, but Xenoblade 2 never got a single fucking Amiibo.
Yeah, and like
and
that's
so there always has been these games that don't have drops.
for sure.
There was never a Yoshi's Crafted World fucking one.
But I also think that's but I also think that we've been in the slow end.
No Goichi.
No
Goichi Amiibo. Fuck.
No new Amiibo for New Horizons. I think we've been in the slow death of Amiibo for a long time.
I mean, yeah, but I mean, like, I'd have to look at like the release cadence of Amiibo, like numbers per year, but like, I think it's just the new normal for Amiibo. I think we say slow death in comparison to Wii U, but like, if they're releasing, I don't know if this is correct, but let's just say 5 a year for the last 6 years.
Yeah.
Smash being its own different thing, but like, are they not? They're just gonna be a Smash on Switch too, and there's gonna be a fucking Amiibo for every character. So like, I don't know. I think that the energy will still continue.
Yeah, we'll see. I certainly hope so. I mean, I love Amiibo. Yeah. Let's look at the next question here. This is question 9. We're looking for one specific answer here. What franchise will be revived with a new full-price retail title this generation?
Be revived. Presumably a Nintendo IP?
Yes.
Yeah. You have an answer?
Yes.
I should have fucking looked at this one before.
My answer is a deep one. Is Star Fox.
Sure.
It's 9 years this year since the last Star Fox game.
Yeah.
We talk often about the opportunity for Nintendo IP to become these transmedia properties. Yeah. Star Fox actually already has in meaningful ways. I think of the anime cartoons they did for the release of Star Fox Zero, or even the puppets they did in like Robot Chicken style.
Yeah.
For E3 2015.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we need Nintendo EPD internally to try Star Fox again.
Sure, yeah.
I think
it's been fucking decades and decades and decades.
Yeah, it's been since Star Fox 64, which to this day is the only internally developed Star Fox game.
That's true, yeah, because even Star Fox 1 and 2 were...
Yeah, Argonaut, yeah. Obviously, Nintendo's worked closely with these teams, but EAD made 64. It's the only game they've actually made themselves. So I'll go Star Fox. I think it's got great potential for transmedia opportunities, but moreover, it's just like, it's maybe the last staple Nintendo series that has no real modern presence at all.
Sure, yeah.
Other than being sort of dragged along in the likely places in a Smash Brothers and on NSO, etc.
Yeah. My answer is going to be Nintendogs.
Oh, okay.
I have long thought that the casual appeal of Nintendo software has been solid over the Switch, but not enough. And I think that Nintendo could really bring in... They could bring back a casual market if they design more software specifically for that market. And I think that Nintendogs, in the way that I see as like a Nintendo Pets that has like a lot of different animal options, is one that would not be something that I would completely have to reinvent. It would just have to be expanded and given a little bit more marketing. And that could be something that a lot of people are getting really, really into. If they make some sort of social thing, because Nintendogs kind of was social, but certainly not in the era where online play was a prevalent enough thing to make it a core part of the game's design. That could be fucking massive for them.
That's an electric choice. I think it's a very, very strong choice.
I would say that is a slightly less likely choice than F-Zero, which I do think is primed for that, especially with the release of 99. And now with Kirby Air Ride coming back, Nintendo showing that at least to some degree they have interest in exploring multiple avenues for racing games. And I think that a F-Zero in 2 years, a new big F-Zero, a couple years after 99, a couple years after Mario Kart World, I think that's very, very likely. Yeah, Nintendogs I think is less likely, but I think it would be much smarter.
It's something of a foregone conclusion in my view that we're getting another new F-Zero.
Yeah. The fun part is about 3 months ago, we would have been like, Donkey Kong,
Yeah.
please, God.
Yeah.
And honestly, we might have also said that for Tomodachi Life and Rhythm Heaven.
Yeah.
Technically, we're getting 3 major revivals just within the next 12 months.
Yeah, exactly. Last question here, Tucker, before I go eat some salmon.
Oh, wait. Can I add a stipulation that I also think that Hotel Dusk is going to get one?
Fair. Go ahead. Fair enough. Final question
number 10
of the day here. Will more or less than 50%, and this is an interesting question here, will more or less than 50% of releases from major publishers, examples, Microsoft / Activision, EA, Ubisoft, Square Enix, etc., your big publishers, release on Switch 2? I'm talking 50% benchmark, less than 50%, more than 50%.
I think more, well, specifically for new games.
Yeah.
And also it's possible that they are late ports as well, right?
Yeah, I'm just talking the games they release in the time of the generation.
I think more
than
50%. I think Xbox is fucking hungry to port those shits. I think Square Enix is hungry to have their games not only be for the highest profile or highest power systems. I think Capcom is just ready to have everything be designed for Nintendo and have the other things be a fucking afterthought. Ubisoft's games are going to be an interesting one, but I think that they're ready for that too. And that's basically all the major ones. And we know Call of Duty is going to come in some capacity, hopefully or ideally on a yearly basis. And that would mean that, because I mean, frankly, Call of Duty is the only thing that Activision does that wouldn't be on Switch. And so like, and then any revivals of like Activision stuff that come through this acquisition, like, Spiral, of course that would be on Switch. Or like if they bring back Guitar Hero, of course that's going to be on Nintendo. So like,
it's on Wii U.
I think more is the comfortable answer for me.
I think it's less.
Which of these examples do you think that I mentioned won't be?
I think all of them. To be honest,
you don't think any of those will be on Switch 2?
I'm talking again.
You don't think Call of Duty will be on Switch 2? You don't think Final Fantasy will be on Switch 2? You don't think Resident Evil or Monster Hunter will be on Switch 2?
I'm talking about the course of generation, looking back in 8 years, 9 years time. If you look at everything,
I think all those will be revealed at a Nintendo Direct.
That's interesting. I just Capcom, for example, their sales are strongest on PC.
Yeah.
Significantly. Monster Hunter World, for instance, or not, Monster Hunter Wilds, interestingly, overperformed on PC, underperformed on console. Part of that is because it's very Japanese, and there was no Nintendo option, to be clear. That's a factor. Maybe I'm burned by the last 13 years, how about? But I think I just don't believe the promise that the picture painted by the first 18 months of the system's life or 2 years system's life will be reflective of the subsequent 6.
Sure.
I like the case we make that Switch 2 will bring the average fidelity and like the minimum viable SKU for these games down. Mm-hmm. I just don't know how true it is as we get further away from this year. And so I could see the number being well above 50% through 2027 and then it falling off remarkably bit after that point. A game like GTA 6, I don't think it's coming to Switch 2.
Yeah. Or come to Switch 2 Pro.
Come to Switch 2 Pro, sure.
Yeah.
But so maybe it's just pessimism, but I think that if you take a global view of the generation, I just don't think the first half will look like the second half, and that's been true for Switch and true for Wii U.
The interesting thing is I agree with that, and I still think that it would be more because I think that the first 4 years will be so packed with quote-unquote parody third-party releases and ports of older things, like basically anything from PS4 and up to this now for PS5, I think is going to be churned through over the course of the next couple of years. And then it's not like we've stopped getting third-party releases on Switch.
Yeah.
They just haven't been the highest profile ones. And so I think that if basically everything, and actually they backfill a lot in those first 4 years, and even if it's 40%, in the second half of the generation, which I think is a reasonable number, it's
Yeah.
a little less than half. That averages out to over 50%
Sure.
for the course of the generation. Because I mean, like we were getting stuff on Switch that doesn't even make fucking sense to be on Switch, and they had to find answers to that through cloud versions.
Yeah.
And like they're probably not going to do that again. But like, if like we saw Capcom and Ubisoft and fucking Remedy and Square Enix and all these teams, IO, bring their games to Switch in a fucking half-assed version that probably combined through all those games, probably 1 million people played all the fucking cloud versions combined. If they're that desperate to get games on Switch 1 where it wouldn't fucking work at all, having a comparatively piss-ass version of Witcher 4, a year after launch, I think is very likely.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it's just pessimism hardwired into me by the last 2 generations.
Yeah.
But we'll see. I certainly, again, in the interest of it being kind of my only system, I would certainly like if it's over 50%.
Yeah. Now here's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
Did we answer any of these the same? No, I think we were different on literally all of them. To recap, how many of the units will Switch 2 sell in its lifetime? Abram says 85. I say over 100. I say 102.5 specifically.
Yeah.
How many hardware revisions will Switch 2 get? I say 3. Abram says 2. How many games will Nintendo release on Switch 2 each year on average? Abram says 11. I say 14. How many new IP will Nintendo launch on the system? You say 8. I say 16. Will the generation be longer, shorter, or about the same length as Switch 1? You say same. I say longer. Will you play the system more, less, or the same as Switch 1? You say more. I say less. Will Nintendo reinvent more, less, or roughly the same number of franchises? You say less. I say same. Will the last Amiibo be released during Switch 2? You say yes. I say no. And what franchise will be revived with a new full-price retail release? You say Star Fox. I say Nintendogs. And finally, will more or less than 50% of releases from major publishers be on Switch 2? You say less. I say more than 50%.
Cool.
So yeah, that's we have. There will be a winner.
Yeah, there will be.
Out of all this, because there's so many. We're different on literally everything.
Yeah. So we'll check back in once in a while. And then.
Oh, because that's right. I remember when you pitched this to me as something we sort of check in at the end of the year when we're doing a Nintendo recap video, and see what the progress is on. These things.
Yeah, and that'd be really fun. Because most of these we can keep score of.
Sure.
As we go, which would be really cool. But Tucker, I think we've done it. Let us know in the comments your answers to these questions. Play along with us.